Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 3 different sections along with the daily practice question. In the analysis part, we'll first talk about the debate between efficiency versus equity in the context of the recommendations of 16th Finance Commission, the associated issues and the way forward. Then in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the structural shift being witnessed in India's R&D ecosystem, where private sector is now the dominant spender and has replaced the government. Then in the mains value addition, we'll talk about the representation of women in the Indian politics. Coming to the prelims pointers, we'll have a discussion with respect to 4 important topics for the upcoming UPSC 2027 prelims. Stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is about fiscal federalism, efficiency versus equity debate. India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of state. We have Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, which basically talks about this, and this itself shows us or tells us the centralizing tendency which we have, the dominance of the center with respect to the distribution and the exercise of power. And it is for that reason we have had many scholars, including K.C. Weir, who basically termed India's structure as quasi-federal, not true federation. Rather, it's a quasi-federal structure where center has a dominant vis-a-vis the states. Now, if you look, one of the very important aspects of this federal structure which we have, unique federal structure which we have, sui generis, you will see that there is one particular aspect, and that is in the aspect of finances. And once we talk about the finances, we have fiscal federalism with respect to the distribution of resources, the monetary resources. Now, what you'll have to understand is, in India's structure, center has a dominance with respect to the taxation powers. Center has a dominance with respect to the mobilization of resources. On the other hand, it is the states who have more of the responsibility, specifically with respect to some of the important domains, some of the important social sectors, for example, the health, the education. Therefore, states are perpetually dependent on the center. And we have this particular editorial which has been featured in the Hindu, which talks about one particular aspect. It says that recently we have had the 16th Finance Commission, chaired by Dr. Arvind Panagariya, which has given its recommendation. And what he says is, what the authors say in this article is, that the Finance Commission is in one way or the other implicitly following the guidelines of the center. And it is coming up with the aspects of efficiency and compromising the aspects of equity. Right? So because equity in terms of that we have many of the states which have structural issues, which have structural constraints in terms of history, in terms of the other things, geography. So their interests are being compromised. We'll try to comprehensively see that what Finance Commission is all about. We'll look at the recommendations of the 16th Finance Commission. We'll talk about the associated challenges, and we'll also incorporate the challenges which are talked about in this particular article. And then we'll also talk about the implications and the way forward. It's going to be a very comprehensive discussion, very, very important part of the Constitution and the federation aspect, the federalism aspect, right? Now, if you look at the constitutional basis with respect to the devolution of funds, distribution of funds, or what we call as the word which we use is devolution of funds, we have Article 270, which talks about the net proceeds of taxes. Net proceeds of taxes, I would be really happy if any one of you tells me what do we mean by net proceeds of taxes. And there is the second question, who certifies, which body in India certifies the net proceeds of taxes? These are the 2 questions. Give me the answer in the comments. Article 270 talks about the devolution of the net proceeds of taxes. With respect to, for example, we have a particular basket. Imagine a particular basket, and it has the resources in terms of the revenues which are accrued because of the income tax or corporation tax or the central GST or the center's component in integrated goods and services tax. So that is what the divisible pool of basket is. And that is basically distributed between the center and the state. So 270 talks about that. Then we have Article 280, which basically talks about the constitution of Finance Commission. So the precedents, as at such times he thinks fit, basically constitutes the Finance Commission. Now, what is the very objective of Finance Commission? If in one particular line it is asked that what is the mandate or what is the objective of Finance Commission, it is to correct the fiscal imbalance. Fiscal imbalance first in terms of the vertical fiscal imbalance, that is between the center and the states. Finance Commission should make sure that the dominance of the center with respect to the collection of resources it is basically matched with the requirements of the states. It should not be like that the Finance Commission gives a kind of a recommendation which in one way or the other gives more of advantage to the center. So it needs to correct this particular vertical devolution, right? Fiscal imbalance. Second is the aspect of horizontal fiscal imbalance. That is, it also needs to consider, it should consider the kind of limitations which different states have in terms of history, in terms of geography, in terms of institutions, right? So it needs to take into consideration different factors so that there is equity aspect, so that there is equitable distribution of resources, right? Now, what is the main task of the Finance Commission? We have primarily four things which you have to keep in mind. The very first is with respect to that it recommends the vertical devolution, that is between the center and the states. Okay, that how much the center would keep and how much the states would keep. Second, we have the horizontal devolution, that how the resources which are given to the states, how they are to be divided among different states, horizontal devolution. Third, it talks about the principles which should govern the grants in aid. And this is the very basis of this particular article, the grants. Remember that. We'll talk about that. Fourth is that it also recommends measures that how to augment the consolidated funds of different states so that ultimately we have the democratic decentralization which has been done through the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. And we have the urban local bodies and we have the rural local bodies. Their functioning is enhanced. They are made more robust, right? And fifth, whatever matter the President thinks fit to be considered by the Finance Commission. So these are the 5 things which you should remember. Now, what is the divisible pool of taxes? See, as I told you, that we have a basket and that basket contains those taxes which are basically to be distributed between the center and the states and then among the states. Now, divisible pool of taxes, for example, it includes the proceeds of income tax, the proceeds of corporate tax, corporation tax, the proceeds with respect to the central GST, CGST, yeah, IGST mein, in IGST, the center's component in the IGST. So that forms the divisible pool of taxes. One thing which you'll have to keep in mind is that this divisible pool of taxes, it basically excludes the cesses and surcharges. I hope you're clear with what cesses are. Cesses and surcharges are basically tax on tax. Cesses are for specific purpose. Jaise bhai, you must have heard about the education cess, or let's say the Krishi Kalyan cess with respect to the agriculture. Surcharge, once we talk about the surcharge, they are basically having a progressive nature. They are basically imposed on high incomes. Okay? What you'll have to understand is that whatever income or whatever revenues the government of India gets with respect to cesses and surcharges, it does not form a part of the divisible pool of taxes. With time, with years, what we have seen is center is imposing a lot of cesses and surcharges and their amount has substantially increased, but they do not form a part of the basket which is to be distributed between the center and the states. Okay? If I were to give you the number for 25 and 26, if you look at the divisible pool of taxes, 81%. The divisible pool of taxes comprised 81% of the gross tax revenue. जो भी total tax revenue है, the gross tax revenue, the divisible pool comprised only 81% of that. Means what? 19% was basically in terms of the cesses and surcharge. So 19% of the gross tax revenue is not incorporated in this divisible pool of taxes. समझ में आ गया? Right. Now, once we talk about the vertical devolution, the center and the states, how much or what all recommendations different finance commissions have given. If you look at the recommendations of the 13th Finance Commission, whose recommendations were valid from the year 2010 to 15, it recommended that 32% should be devolved to the states, but in addition there were also conditional transfers in terms of centrally sponsored scheme. So sirf 32% nahi tha. In addition, what you also had was the conditional transfers in terms of the centrally sponsored scheme. With respect to the 14th Finance Commission, the timeline being 2015 to 2020, the recommendation was increased, the vertical devolution was increased to almost 42%. But at the same time, this centrally sponsored scheme transfers were almost made negligible. They were completely reduced, right? Now, with respect to the 15th Finance Commission, the recommendation is being valid from 20 to 26. The devolution was reduced to 41%. Why? Because 1% of the resources were to go to the Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir. Okay? So this is what you'll have to keep in mind. Now, once we talk about the vertical devolution, this is the ratio which has to be followed. 32% for the 13th Finance Commission, then increased to 42%, and then 41%. 16th Finance Commission has retained that. It has retained the aspects or the devolution to 41%. Once we talk about the horizontal devolution, that means कि जो भी states का share है, whatever the share of the states is, how that is to be devolved among different states. For that, the Finance Commission uses certain parameters. That which all parameters we would consider with respect to deciding that how much the states are going to get. Simple as that. Very, very important table and a very, very important information with respect to the prelims and both means. Look at this. These are the criteria with respect to the horizontal devolution. 13th Finance Commission. Now, these are the criteria. If we talk about the very first criteria, it is the income distance. It's the income distance. What is income distance? Let's say you have this particular state, state A, having the highest per capita income. Highest per capita income. एक पूरे इंडिया में एक state है having the highest per capita income. And this is the state B. And this is the level of the per capita income of this particular state. This distance, this gap is basically the income distance. So, income distance has been one of the dominant parameters as far as the horizontal devolution is concerned. Look at this. For 13th Finance Commission, the weightage given to income distance was 47.5%, increased to almost 50% for 14th Finance Commission, again reduced to 45% for 15th, and for 16th, it is 42.5%. Then we have the population and area, population with respect to 1971 census and 2011 census. Look at the numbers. With respect to the population in terms of the 1971 census, this has not been considered for the 16th Finance Commission. But the population with respect to 2011 census has been considered and the weightage given is 17.5%. Do remember these numbers, important. Then we have the area. Area in terms of the area of that particular state has been given a weightage of 10% for 13th, and again it has been retained at 10% for the 16th also. Then we have certain other parameters. अब यहाँ पे आप एक चीज देखो. Just look at one particular thing. If we talk about the equity aspect, if I want to maintain the equity among different states, I should rather consider the income distance. ठीक है? So equity relates to the income distance parameter. Then the need aspect. That what is the need of specific state. For that we have population, for that we have area. So these parameters with respect to population and area, they form a part of the need based aspect. Income distance form a part of the equity based aspect. Then we have efficiency. How much efficient a particular state is. For that, for example, we have forests, we have fiscal discipline, we have demographic performance, the tax effort, the state's contribution to GDP. This is a new parameter which has been introduced with respect to the 16th Finance Commission, and the weightage given is 10%. Okay? So this is efficiency aspect. One thing you would notice is that we are slowly going from the equity and need aspect to that of efficiency. And this is the major crux of this particular article. That though we are going with this particular aspect, we are considering the efficiency with which the different states are performing. But are we doing right? Are we missing something? Right? This is one of the aspects. Now, let's talk about the key recommendations with respect to the 16th Finance Commission. Please pay attention, very, very important. If I were to talk about the vertical devolution, it has been retained at 41%, I told you, right? 41%. And what is the rationale? What is the reasoning which Finance Commission has given? Because many of the states, more than 18 states, once the consultation mechanism was taking place between the Finance Commission and various states, more than 18 states said to the Finance Commission, including the state of Karnataka and other, especially the opposition ruled states, that it should be increased to almost 50%. जो भी divisible pool of taxes है आपका, whatever the divisible pool of taxes you have, 50% of it should go to the states. But this has not been accepted by the Finance Commission. It has retained at 41%. And this is the reason why the authors in this article say that it is implicitly, the recommendations of the 16th Finance Commission implicitly take forward the very mandate of the government. Okay? The reasoning which the Finance Commission has given is what, and these are good numbers. It says that once we talk about the overall resources which come as far as the tax imposition is concerned, whatever tax is being imposed in the country, the whole tax, a component of almost 76% of the overall taxes which are imposed in the country, they are basically going to the center. ठीक है, center has a dominant power with respect to the imposition and collection of the taxes. The rest 24% are being collected and kept by the states. Finance Commission says ठीक है, that center has a dominant position, more than 3/4, but 41% of this amount, 41% of this amount which the center has also goes to the states. So they have their own 24%. Then 41% of this amount is also going to the states, plus center also gives certain grants, plus center also gives certain incentives in terms of the centrally sponsored scheme. So what Finance Commission says, that states are already getting enough. It should ideally, there is no need to basically increase it to 50%. That is what the take of Finance Commission is. Second reasoning which the Finance Commission has given, it says that higher devolution can strain the center's capacity. Finance Commission says that center has very important strategic obligations. Strategic obligations का मतलब क्या है? In terms of, for example, the defense outlays. We are going for defense indigenization, defense modernization. That requires resources. So therefore, we cannot compromise on that. Or let's talk about the infrastructure. For example, recently we saw the hydrogen train. Or recently we also saw the highways, the high-speed rail connectivity, the railways, expansion of the railways. So with respect to the infrastructure creation, center has quite an important responsibility. So that cannot be taken for granted. Therefore, center needs its own funding. Center needs to have its own funds. Okay. Next, it also says that a lot of amount is also being given to the states in terms of centrally sponsored schemes, which I have already told you. If I were to talk about the horizontal devolution, okay. So as I told that we have these factors. Let me again recap this for you. We have the income distance, which has been taken into consideration for 16th Finance Commission. Population of 2011 census, 17.5% weightage has been given. 10% to area. Then again 10% to forest. How well the states are maintaining their forest resources. Then we have demographic performance, which has been given a 10% weightage, and a new category. What is that new category? The state's contribution to GDP again has been given a 10% weightage. What the Finance Commission says, that we are following the principle of gradualism. Very important word. Do mention in your answers and keep this in your mind. Gradualism means what? That we are not suddenly shifting from equity and need-based parameters to efficiency. Rather, we are going in a slow format. Because efficiency is also very important. And why it is important? See, during 1970s and 80s, we had many of the states in South India, including Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which implemented a lot of family planning measures. And with respect to that, what they attained was replacement level fertility. Their fertility rates were controlled. Plus, they invested heavily as far as the social indicators are concerned, with respect to the human development indicators. At the same time, the northern Indian states, the UP and Bihar, the Hindi heartland, they were busy in something else. There was a population explosion which was going on. Now, population is one of the criterias over here. Okay? What the South Indian state says that we have contributed more to the GDP, we have worked on the human development indicators, and we are being penalized for that because we are getting a low share. Rather, you should also give importance to the efficiency aspect, the efficiency with which we have carried out things. But that is not being considered. On the other hand, these states which have actually not worked as far as the family planning measures are concerned, as far as the human development indicators are concerned, they are being given an undue advantage. Therefore, Finance Commission says that we need to give importance to the efficiency. But in this particular article, please understand, in this particular article, the authors are not talking about UP and Bihar specifically. They are talking about some other aspect of equity. If you go through the article, they talk about the revenue deficit grants. They are specifically talking about that particular grant, which is given to different states. Because different states don't have, even after devolution of funds, they do not have the capacity to carry out various policies. Therefore, they need to be given certain grants. Those grants have been stopped. That is primarily the very basis on which the authors are talking in this article, and we'll talk about that. Okay? So we'll follow a gradualist approach from the equity and need aspect to efficiency aspect. And we will recognize the efficiency with which different states are basically working. New criteria has been introduced with respect to states' contribution to GDP, I've already told. And what would be the resulting pattern? That there would be a directional shift towards the efficiency, which is needed. You cannot always incentivize or, appreciate those mediocre states. Okay? In terms of, see, they have not really worked. The fact of the matter is that things with respect to human development indicators, definitely improvements have been observed in UP and Bihar also, but not to that level which has been observed in the other states. So they should be at least incentivized. The other states need to be incentivized. Okay. Now, what are the challenges in the Finance Commission's recommendation? Pehli cheez, first and the foremost, is the exclusion of cess and surcharge. As I told you, for the financial year 2024, the amount or cess and surcharge comprised of almost 19% of the gross tax revenue. Gross tax revenue, almost 19%. And divisible pool was 81%. So, and it has been observed the center is relying more on cesses and surcharges because they do not form a part of the divisible pool of taxes. This is a concern which many of the states has. In fact, the former Chief Minister of Karnataka, Siddaramaiah, he basically told the same thing to the Finance Commission once consultations were happening, that why don't you include these cesses and surcharges in a part, in basically a basket of divisible pool of taxes. But again, Finance Commission said no, and it gave two important reasoning. First important reasoning was that, again, the same reason, that center has strategic obligations in terms of important sectors with respect to education, with respect to, let's say, the agriculture or defense. So that cannot be compromised. Second, the reasoning which the Finance Commission gave was that it is constitutionally impermissible. We have Article 270 and 271 which give the powers to the center to basically impose assesses and surcharges. So it is not within our powers to basically recommend to center to incorporate cesses and surcharges as a part of the divisible pool of taxes. ये हमारे power ही नहीं है. It is only up to the will of the center to decide whether it should incorporate cesses and surcharges as a part of divisible pool of taxes. So this was a reason which was given. Next is balancing the equity versus efficiency. As I told you, certain states are shouting for or are basically requesting for the efficiency part. They are supporting the efficiency part. Then on the other hand, we have the states like UP and Bihar, which basically talk about the equity. Why? Because according to them, what they say is that we suffer from historical disadvantages. But the authors in this article say something else. We'll talk about that. Okay. Limited increase despite demand. Again, demand was that increase this devolution, the vertical devolution, to 50%, but that has not been agreed. Okay. There was a demand by more than 18 states. So states are not really happy because they are saying that almost 2/3 of the overall expenditure, which goes as far as the government expenditure is concerned, 2/3 means almost 66% of the overall expenditure is being borne by us. So why not you give us more resources? That is the issue. Then fiscal federalism versus central priorities. Fiscal federalism. Federalism, you must be aware that it was declared as a part of the basic structure in the SR Bombay versus Union of India. And as a component of federalism, we can also basically take this aspect of fiscal federalism. So ideally, states should be given their due share. Dr. Ambedkar said, the states are not mere appendages to the center. They are not dependencies on the center. They have their own constitutional existence. And for that, they need resources. There has to be autonomy in place. But on the other hand, we also have central priorities. So there's a debate. Central priorities in terms of the defense expenditure, in terms of defense modernization, in terms of agriculture, in terms of expansion of infrastructure, highways, pipelines, high-speed rail, metro connectivity. So center has its own obligations. Now, what are the highlights of this particular editorial? Very, very important. If you understand this, there would be no need to go through the editorial itself. The very first thing is that grants have been substantially reduced. यहाँ मैंने आपको बताया था, over here I told you that there are 4 functions of the Finance Commission. First is with respect to vertical devolution, second is with respect to the horizontal devolution, third is with respect to the principles that should govern the grants in aid under Article 275. एक discretionary grant भी होता है, 282. Discretionary, on the discretion of the center. And this is basically 275. The grants which are basically given as per the principles outlined by the Finance Commission. What the author says is that these grants have been substantially reduced. The overall share of the grants with respect to the last Finance Commission, the 15th Finance Commission, out of the total transfers, the grants comprised of almost 20%. Exactly, it's 19.3%, but you can approximate it, 20%. Now it has been reduced to 8.3%. Out of the total transfers, only 8.3 is now comprised by the grants. Okay? So now just 2 grants remain. पहले क्या था, the earlier finance commission used to recommend the revenue deficit grants. Whatever deficit the states have, in order to compensate for that, some grants was given to different states. Second, state specific grants. Fourth, the sector specific grants. 3 types of grants were given. These have been completely removed as far as the 16th Finance Commission is concerned. Only 2 grants remain. One is the local body grant. Local body in terms of the panchayats, the municipalities, how to basically make the whole structure more robust, their functioning more robust. And second, with respect to disaster management. Only these 2 types of grants have been retained. Over here, you have the authors who have some issues. That why you have reduced this? Because there are certain states who were completely dependent on the center with respect to the funding through the revenue deficit grants, but they have been removed. Now, these revenue deficit grants, once they have been removed, and the reasoning which Finance Commission has given is that, the logic which they have given is that we are now going for fiscal discipline. We would make sure that states do not go for excessive expenditures. ये भी सही है. This is also a correct logic. What they are saying is, Finance Commission are saying is that we would prevent the moral hazard. According to them, according to Finance Commission, center used to regularly give this much amount as a form of revenue deficit grants to different states. States developed dependency on the center, and they started spending this particular amount for unnecessary purposes. Freebies, in terms of freebies. And therefore, we have to reduce it. We have stopped it. Only 2 types of grants would be given. But what is the logic of the authors? What the authors say? Authors say that, ठीक है, you are talking about the equity aspect in terms of the we're not talking about UP and Bihar. But what about the northeastern states? Northeastern states have connectivity issues, have connectivity constraints, and you have reduced these revenue deficit grants. Or what about those states, for example, West Bengal, where you have a lot of demographic pressure, and you have reduced or you have stopped the transfer of the grants. So that is the issue. Shift towards performance-based fiscal transfers. Finance Commission has now gone for performance-based transfers. On the basis of how you perform, we will provide you the resources. For example, fiscal discipline. For example, in terms of how much of the audit is being conducted, what all governance reforms you are taking. Okay? So these are basically, or how much of the resources are being mobilized by your own. आप खुद से, how much of the resources are you basically mobilizing? Are you imposing taxes? See, this is also a very important point. Many of the state governments, they do not really want to impose taxes. Why? Because of political hesitancy. Because they know elections are going to be there. And if we would impose taxes, people would respond. And regional parties, have more issues with respect to this. Because they're more close to the people. Okay? What are the concerns and the issues? The very first is grants and aid. According to the authors, they are instruments of equalization. We're not talking about UP and Bihar. We're talking about even those states, for example, West Bengal or the northeastern states, which have a natural disadvantage with respect to connectivity, with respect to the structural constraints. What about them? They already have less of devolution, normal devolution. Now you have also completely stopped the revenue deficit grants. How would they manage? That is a concern. Then they have given the case study of Punjab and Kerala. Very good example. The authors in this article say that Punjab is one of the states which is primarily responsible for the food security of the country. And it produces wheat and rice, which is non-taxable. It does not have enough of its own resources. And now you have reduced or you have stopped these revenue deficit grants or state-specific grants. How would? Punjab is so important for the country. And it is not having enough of resources. Same thing goes with Kerala. What the authors say that Kerala comprises almost 23% of India's remittances. Whatever remittances India has received from outside, Kerala comprises of almost 23%. But Kerala has to go for borrowing. Kerala has to go for borrowing even for the basic education purposes, expanding education in the states. So what kind of devolution is this? How you are actually devolving the funds? You are saying efficiency, we understand. But are you not compromising on the equity aspect? Okay? Coupled with low weightage. Now, ये तो issue था ही that you have stopped the revenue deficit grants and the other grants. Plus, you have also, what you have done is, the income distance has been reduced to 42.5% from earlier 45%. So, यहाँ भी equity compromise हो रही है. You are also compromising the equity. Got it? Then, we have conditionalities attached. Now, it is good that you are giving the local body grants. Very good. We appreciate it. Because you really want to strengthen the democratic decentralization. We understand the grassroots democracy. But why you have attached conditionalities? Because Finance Commission has attached conditionalities that we would give you funds only when you would show us some improvement with respect to the sanitation, with respect to water supply, with respect to the mobilization of your own resources. So what the authors are saying is that these conditionalities are fine. But if a state does not even have a capacity to bring improvements, how would it show it to you? Without getting the adequate funds, how would it show to you that it is making improvements? So it is saying that there has to be some autonomy in place. ठीक है, आगे बढ़ते हैं. Now what are the implications of it? The positive and the negative. ठीक है. The positive, and why I have given this is so that you enhance your perspective. Okay? You cannot have just one-sided view. You need to have a balanced opinion, and therefore these implications are given. Positive thing is that it promotes fiscal prudence, because we have many of the states which are excessively, recklessly spending, recklessly expenditure, especially before the elections. Once elections are there, there are a lot of freebies that we'll give you, and I covered freebies in one of the analyst sessions, where they say that we'll give you the televisions, we'll give you the grinders, and we'll give you this and that. You vote for us. And because of it, ultimately, a lot of expenditure goes into waste. Ideally, that should be, given to productive sectors in terms of education or the skill development. That encourages the outcome-based governance. Whatever outcome you would show to us in terms of the water, sanitation, improvements in hygiene, will give you funding according to that. So it's a good thing. Then strengthens the local government, because local body grants have been maintained and a good amount of money is being given to the local bodies. Again, a very good thing. Improves the accountability. Accountability by whatever you are doing. Is it basically bearing some fruits? Is it having an outcome? Outcome-oriented governance. Very important word. Do mention in your answers. Incentivizes better public finance. That you have limited public finance. How you are actually utilizing it? Are you utilizing it in a very efficient manner? And if you do so, then we'll incentivize you. Then the management of the funding, right? Now, what are the negatives? It weakens the equalization function. The very objective of the Finance Commission is to correct the vertical fiscal imbalance and horizontal fiscal imbalance, right? We studied in the starting portion. But if you are giving undue advantage or more importance to the efficiency aspect, what about the equity? That would be compromised. So, usko dusra word kya hai? The second word is equalization. There has to be equity in place. There has to be equalization in place. Okay? Increases the regional disparities. Now, you are considering the efficiency parameter. Because of it, the South Indian states and the Western states, Maharashtra and Gujarat, would basically be at advantage. They would have more funding. What about the Northeastern states? Their revenue deficit grants have been stopped. They would reduce less of funding. So there would be increase in the disparities with respect to the regions, right? Then limit states' fiscal space. States have a lot of obligation in terms of the overall expenditure. And if you are reducing the overall transfers, or if you are imposing conditionalities, the leg space, the autonomy would be affected. Strengthens the union's fiscal dominance. This is not in line with the kind of federal characteristics which Dr. Ambedkar expected, or which other constitution makers expected, because this is in one way or the other giving undue advantage to the center. Risks undermining the cooperative federalism, a word coined by the Niti Aayog, cooperative and competitive federalism. That is at stake. What should be the way forward? There has to be a balance between efficiency and equity. You cannot give undue advantage to one particular parameter. There has to be a balance. And why not go with, why you're going with one size fits all approach, that we will only have these parameters? Why can't you have a differentiated approach, especially for the northeastern states and the hill states, Uttarakhand, Himachal? Okay. Reconsider the revenue deficit grants. Why? Because this is very important. Punchi Commission also talked about this particular part, that many of the states do not have the capacity with respect to bearing the revenue expenditure. So they need to be given certain grants in terms of the revenue deficit grants in order to maintain that fiscal balance. That has to be done. Then fiscal federalism aspect. Rationalize the cesses and surcharges. Why not with time? We are not saying that in one go you incorporate cesses and surcharges as a part of the divisible pool of taxes. No. What we are saying is that have a kind of a graded approach, where with time you include certain parts of cesses and surcharge, or reduce cesses and surcharge. If you say that cesses and surcharge are really very important, cap have a cap with respect to the overall amount? Why not you say that we'll just have cesses and surcharge as just to the point of 15% of the gross tax revenue? Right now it's somewhere around 19%. Why not you reduce it to almost 15%? So that 85% form a part of the divisible pool of taxes, or have a sunset clause that by 2035 we would completely, or we would do away with the cesses and surcharges. Okay. Next is greater fiscal autonomy. This has been recommended by the second ARC also, that with respect to the local body, with respect to the urban local bodies and the rural local bodies, there has to be autonomy in place, because every state has its own needs and aspirations. The needs of Mizoram are completely different from the needs of UP, are completely different from the needs of Kerala. So why not have a differentiated policy, or why not have the autonomy in place? You cannot have one size fits all approach. Strengthen the own revenue mobilization. This is also very important. Why? Because if the states are not going to mobilize their own resources, they would be a perpetual dependence on the center. And perpetual dependency is not good. They need to come up with their own resources. We understand that the states especially have this before the elections. They have this political hesitancy. They cannot impose the stamp duties. They cannot impose the land taxes. Ideally, they can, but they don't do it. Why? Because they know that the people would basically show them the kind of views they have in the elections. So they have this particular thing. Fiscal responsibility and budget management. Reckless spending by the states must be avoided. And for that, we already have the FRBM of 2003. That must be kept in. We have the reports of the Reserve Bank of India. Even this year's economic survey has highlighted that states are going for excessive or extravagant expenditures, which are not really needed. Rather than focusing on more productive sectors, they are spending recklessly on some unproductive sectors. So that should be avoided. So understand that we have the federal aspect, the federalism aspect. States have a very important role to play. Strong states together can make a strong union, can only make a strong union. Weak states cannot make a strong union. We need to have more of stronger states in terms of the overall aspect, in terms of the distribution of powers, in terms of the distribution of resources, in terms of the autonomy in place. Okay. We understand that we have a quasi-federal structure. But in order to achieve the visions of Viksit Bharat, ultimately, the union cannot develop on its own. The states have to develop. The states cumulatively have to develop in order to achieve the objective of Viksit Bharat. Okay. Let's have a mains practice question. Again, very, very important topic. Please do write the answer. As I've always said, that writing is the only panacea you have, the only medication. One thing which can really increase your chances of success in the examination is writing. So do not stop. Just continue writing. 16th Finance Commission marks a shift from need-based equalization to performance-based fiscal transfers. Discuss the associated challenges, what all challenges we talked about, and examine the implications, positive and negative implications. Suggest measures to strike a balance between efficiency and equity. Whatever content has been taught, with the help of that, you can write a very good answer. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know in the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about the structural shift being witnessed in the India's R&D ecosystem. Now, there's a good news. Why? Because we have now the private sector, which has become the dominant spender as far as the overall research and development spending is concerned. Why? Because earlier we used to have the government. Now, government has different priorities. For example, especially in a country like India, where there's a lot of inequality, where there are so many challenges, it is really important for the government to focus on the other areas as well. Therefore, there was a need that private sector should come on board and contribute more as far as the R&D is concerned. The article which has been featured in the Hindu says that it is good that the private R&D spending has increased, but we need to focus on other areas as well. For example, better research in terms of the number of researchers in the country, in terms of the overall skills which the researchers have, in terms of developing the overall comprehensive innovation ecosystem. Right? Because mere spending won't help. Mere the numbers won't help. And the article also talks about the fact that the corporates in India spend more on advertisements. They spend more on advertisements as compared to the research and development. So very, very important topic, part of GS3, Science and Tech and Innovation. The context is that according to the Department of Science and Technology, for the very first time in India's history, the private sector now accounts for almost 51.8, you can say almost 52% of India's total expenditure in the year 2023-24, overtaking the government spending. And this is a significant shift. Why? Because see, if you look at especially the developed countries, including the emerging economies and the very strong countries like China, what you'll observe is that the private sector over there is one of the strongest players as far as overall innovation is concerned. Most of the research which basically takes place in those countries, it is a result of the private enterprises. Let's talk about the SpaceX. Let's talk about any of the AI ventures as far as the US is concerned or China is concerned. So most of them are basically the private entities. Now, in India, if you compare what the scenario, if you look at the scenario with respect to the research and development, what you would observe is for years, the government has been the dominant spender. But now the private sector has come on board and now it forms more than 51%, as it contributes more than 51% as far as overall spending is concerned. Industry also employs more core researchers. So the number of researchers employed by the industry, by the corporates, is more than that of the government. Leading corporates, R&D investors include, for example, the transport sector, we have pharmaceuticals, we have the IT sector. So these are the leading, and the most important is the transport sector. So in the corporates, as far as the private spending in the R&D is concerned, that is primarily attributed to or primarily taking place in the transport, in the pharmaceuticals and the IT. Now, why the private R&D has actually increased in India? There are some very important reasons. See, pre-COVID times, we did not give much of the importance to innovation. The very purpose or the very objective of Atmanirbhar Bharat mission was that we need to become self-reliant. We need to basically have our own technologies in place. There has to be indigenized technologies in place so that we are not dependent on the foreign players. Because what we saw during the COVID times was that there was a complete stop as far as the supply chains are concerned. World over, in fact, including the developed countries, they were completely dependent on the semiconductor supply chain specifically, and that too, which were being routed through China. So that greatly affected their economies. In many of the countries, we had the recession because of that. Therefore, countries said that it is very important to focus on resilience. It is very important to have our own industrial base. It is very important to have our own innovation clusters in place. We cannot be perpetually dependent on one particular country or a region. And therefore, governments around the world, not just India, they have started to significantly invest in the research and development domain. And this is one of the primary reasons, because innovation drives competitiveness in a world where you have so much of interlinkages. For example, we are living in a globalized world. Right now, it's not about comparing the enterprises within India. It's about comparing the Indian enterprises with the enterprises in Vietnam or in Bangladesh, because they have more of the productive outcome. They are producing at much lower costs. So that must be taken into consideration. And government has been pushing as far as certain specific sectors are concerned. Let's talk about the semiconductors. We have been going at a rapid pace. The government has come with the Semicon Mission 1, the Semicon 2. So why? Because they know that this is the future. Semiconductor possibly forms the very core of every electronic gadget, howsoever simple it is and howsoever sophisticated it is. So you need to have your own base in place, because semiconductor fabs, the production of semiconductors is not an easy phenomenon. It's a highly technologically intensive phenomenon. And that right now India is basically dependent. Whatever facilities we have, they are basically of ATMP. Assembly, testing and marking and packaging. We are not producing the semiconductors, we are just assembling them. So therefore, it is very important to have our own domestic base as far as manufacturing is concerned. And therefore, the government has been coming up with these missions. Or let's talk about the AI, India AI mission. Sarvam AI, very good example. Not the Golgotias one, but the Sarvam one. Okay. Then we have the growing investments in the semiconductor fabs, the fabrication facilities, the production facilities of these semiconductors, or data centers, which form the very backbone of AI infrastructure. We all know, we all are using the artificial intelligence, right? And AI is the frontier. It's the future. And therefore, we need to have different data centers in place so that quick processing takes place. Okay. Now, let's have a comparative analysis with the R&D spending in different countries around the world. Let's talk about South Korea. Look at the numbers. As a percentage of GDP, it is almost 5%. Almost 5%. United States, it's almost 3.45. And can you imagine the size of US economy? Much, much larger than India. And a 3.45% would obviously be a very good amount of money. ठीक है, substantial amount of money. China, it's almost 2.6%. Look at India, it's just 0.8%. We are not saying, see, we have made improvements, but this is still nothing as compared to China. Let's forget US and South Korea. So we'll have to invest substantially. We'll have to increase the investments as far as the R&D is concerned. Look at the researchers per million. India has 350 researchers per million. Per 10 lakh population, we just have 350 researchers. Look at the numbers for South Korea. 8,000 researchers per million. Or look at for Israel. 8,000 researchers again for per million. So this is the numbers they have. They have more of research. See, if you have more of core researchers, there would be more of research output. And that would then be commercialized. जो भी आप research कर रहे हैं, whatever research is being done in the labs, that has to be commercialized. But for that, you need more of researchers in place. We may have increased the overall spending, but we don't have the adequate number of researchers. And whatever good talent we have, we are suffering from the brain drain. Because most of these graduates from the best colleges of the country, they don't stay in India. They basically fly out to different countries, especially the US or the other countries. And then they carry out the research over there. First of all, because they have better pay incentives. Second, they have that research environment. They would not have this need to again and again request the government for funding. Okay. What is the importance with respect to the higher private research and development spending? What is the importance of that? The very first is improve the technological self-reliance. We would be less dependent on the foreign enterprises. Let's talk about the Tata facilities with respect to the semiconductors assembly in Assam. Or let's say Micron. Micron has significantly invested in Gujarat. Okay. Second is promote innovation-led growth. Innovation-led growth, for example, we have Infosys. We have Infosys and Tata, TCS, coming up with the AI labs and generative AI labs. ठीक है, तो innovation होगा उससे. Then we have support Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Make in India, and very, very important. That's the reason kept in bold. We have, for example, Bharat Forge. Use these examples in your answers. Coming up with the indigenous defense platforms, Bharat Forge. Or let's talk about, we have, for example, let's say Biocon. Biocon, investing in the biosimilars. Okay, our own indigenous technology. Then we have boost high value manufacturing. High value manufacturing in terms of, for example, we have Mahindra EV. Why? Because we should not be dependent on the foreign technological supply chains. Rather, why not we can come up with our own technological supply chains. Mahindra EV. Okay. Then we have enhance the export competitiveness. Let's talk about the pharmaceutical companies in terms of Sun Pharma or Dr. Reddy's. India is known as the pharmacy of the world. And we have these companies, Cipla, Sun Pharma, Dr. Reddy's. They are supplying in huge numbers to African countries specifically, or Latin American countries, generate high skilled employment. You must have heard about the global capability centers. Global capability centers. India hosts more than 2,000 GCCs, especially in Hyderabad, Bengaluru. What are these GCCs? Let's say you have Microsoft and you have Google and these companies. Now they, instead of going for a third party solution, what they would do is they would have their own investments and they would come up with a particular enterprise which would focus on the software development, testing, investments in innovation, so that Google can be dependent on this particular center itself. It need not to have the advice of a third party. And these GCCs host more than 2 million employments. So very, very important. Intel, Microsoft, Qualcomm, Bosch. Then we have reduced dependence on the imported technologies. Why? Because, for example, India is going with the Bharat 6G mission, or we have LCA Tejas. Okay. So these are indigenous technologies. So these examples can be put in place. But what are the challenges? Overall, R&D intensity is very less. The very target is to increase the overall spending to almost 2% of GDP. And right now it's somewhere around 0.8. So you'll have to increase that. Because it is good that private sector is coming on board, but you'll have to increase the overall corpus to almost 2% of GDP. Then shortage of researchers, I've already told you. Without adequate number of researchers, you cannot have a proper research. You will not be able to commercialize the developments which are taking place in the labs itself, the research which is taking place. Private sector priorities. And what the article says is that the corporate has spent more on advertisements than on research. Again, a point to be, we need to consider it, we need to think about it, that why this is happening, why the corporates are investing more in advertisements and less on research. Then measurement versus reality. Many of the scholars are also saying that the kind of increase which we have observed with respect to private enterprises, that they are now contributing more than 50%. It might be the result of better reporting, better accounting. Same may not have translated into real outcomes. There can be an issue, there can be a difference. Okay. Then we have weak industry academia linkage. Right now, even now, we are having more focus. The pedagogy is more focused on theoretical understanding. There is very less linkage with respect to the industry. We're not catering to the industrial demands, what the industry really needs. Then limited deep tech innovation. We are investing in innovation, but we are doing in pharmaceuticals, in transport. Why we are not investing in deep tech for quantum computing? Or let's say the machine learning, artificial neural networks, or let's say the space exploration. Still less of investments are there. What have been the government initiatives? The government came up with the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, and the very objective is to make sure that we invest almost 50,000 crores over the 5 years. And out of this, almost 36,000 crores would be from the private sector, the philanthropy. The very objective is to have an innovation-centered ecosystem, to make sure that there is focus on the industry-academia linkage, to go as per the needs of the industry, the demands of the industry. What are the other initiatives? For example, we have the National Quantum Mission, focuses on the quantum computing, high processing computing. Then we have India AI Mission, again the indigenous development of artificial intelligence in terms of the graphic processing units, also GPUs. Then we have Semiconductor Mission, to have our own indigenous base as far as the semiconductors and display manufacturing is concerned. Okay. Next we have the BIRAC, Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council, in order to make sure that whatever research hubs we have with respect to biotechnology, they are given adequate funding. The startups with respect to the biotech. Okay. Then we have Atal Innovation Mission with respect to Atal Tinkering Labs, in order to usher in the spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation in the minds of the children. We have the Atal Tinkering Labs. Then we have the PM Research Fellowship, so that those researchers who really want to have a frontier research, who want to do the frontier research in certain domains, they can have certain funding. So we have this particular fellowship. Then we have Startup India. India is the world's third largest startup ecosystem. So in order to promote the entrepreneurship, the startup creation, then we have Digital India, we all know. So that we utilize and optimize the digitization in the best possible manner, including the governance aspect. Okay. What should be the way forward? Increase the spending to almost 2%. That has to be done. 0.8% is not enough. And again, majority of it should come from the private sector. They should not go for advertisements, but rather invest more in the best example can be of Mahindra Electric. Really very good. You have so many of the very good cars being manufactured by Mahindra, the electric vehicles. Similarly, the same thing is at the Tata. So that has to be done. Strengthen the industry academia collaborations in terms of the joint research centers, in terms of the innovation clusters, in terms of joint research. Okay. Then we have developed the human capital. Why not we focus more on STEM education in core areas of quantum computing, in AI, in artificial neural networks, in robotics, blockchain technologies, core research, core areas. Why not we come up with the specific curriculums in different, at least start with the top engineering colleges of the country, top research colleges. Then we have encouraged the private investments, give tax incentives to those enterprises which are showing an increasing pace of investments in the research. Then we have focus on frontier technologies. Don't just keep yourself restricted with the biotech or the pharmaceuticals or the transport. Rather go for the research and development in the space, or let's say the clean energy, or let's say the defense platforms. Okay. Quantum computing, the robotics, improve the commercialization. This is very important. There was one particular report which says that we have a lot of patents, but those patents are not able to commercialize them. See, if the research is restricted to the labs itself, there would be no advantage. You need to come up with those research projects, those works, which can be converted or commercialized. That is really very important. And for that, there has to be significant investment. Commercialization requires investments. For example, the venture capitals for deep tech, greater funding, or joint partnerships between the industry and the academia, so that the industry invests and the researchers then give the outcome, and again that is patented, and then ultimately it is commercialized. That has to be done. Because see, with respect to the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which we are witnessing, and the kind of technological pace which we are observing, especially with respect to the development of AI. In the last 5 years, you just imagine what kind of exponential development, disruption has taken place with respect to technology. We have to keep pace with what the other countries are doing. And for that, research and development forms the very base. And in the research and development specifically, the private sector needs to contribute the most. That is very, very important. Okay, let's have a mains practice question. It's a 10 marker. Private sector participation is increasingly shaping India's research and innovation ecosystem. Examine the significance for achieving the technology-led economic growth, significance, the importance. Also highlight the key challenges that continue to constrain India's R&D ecosystem. Specifically, it is not asking you for a way forward, but I have given the way forward. So like a schematic diagram, like a branches of a tree, just before the conclusion, give some way forwards. Okay, please do write, very, very important. Let's go to the mains validation. Coming to the mains validation part, we have one particular news article which has been published on page 3, which basically says that women's group have criticized the all-male Karnataka cabinet. Whenever we talk about the political representation of women in the country, that has been abysmally low. Especially if you look at the state legislatures, it's abysmally low, even at the parliament level, obviously. So that is something which is not good for a democratic polity, because see, politics is something which has been criticized by many as a kind of patriarchal discipline, as a male-dominated discipline. Ideally, politics should have all the sections of the societies in place, so that, because if we will not have adequate numbers of people from different sections, their voices would not be heard. In a democratic polity, it is really important. It is, in fact, it's a non-negotiable aspect of a democracy to have the interests of the different sections safeguarded. And that would only be done once you have representation from that particular section. Very, very important component of GS2, social issues. And also in paper 1, which talks about the women, right? So very, very important. Several women's rights organizations have voiced strong objections to Karnataka Chief Minister D.K. Shivkumar's all-male cabinet, questioning the exclusion of women. There is no women in place in the whole cabinet. The organizations have demanded that the government induct qualified women into the Council of Ministers. So this can be used as a kind of an example once you are writing about any question which talks about the empowerment of women or the conditions of women as far as the politics in India is concerned. Let's go through some data points. In Parliament, with respect to the 18th Lok Sabha, 74 women MPs out of 543, around 14% representation, slightly lower than that of 2019. Rajya Sabha, almost 16 to 17%. State legislature, it's only 9 to 10%. So the condition is even worse at the state legislatures. Very, very important. But the situation remains good as far as the local governments are concerned. Over 14 lakh women have been elected to the Panchayati Raj institutions. Women constitute around 46% of all the elected Panchayat representatives. Many states, for example, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Kerala, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, provide 50% reservation. But over here also, the issues are not, there are some serious issues. There is Panchayat Pati syndrome, where for the namesake, for the reserved seats, you have the women contesting the elections, but ultimately the power is wielded by the husband. So the point is, in real terms, there has not been substantial devolution of power, substantial transfer of power in the hands of the women, even at the grassroots level. And if you look at some of the cases, for example, in Kerala and Karnataka, the women have really, if you had women representatives over there, they have really transformed the whole governance paradigm, especially with respect to planning. So it says, women-led panchayats in Kerala and Karnataka have often been highlighted for effective local governance and participatory planning. This has also resulted in greater investments in some of the social sectors in terms of the education, in terms of the better nutrition for children. Child-centric, women-centric planning has taken place. So this can be used in any of your mains answers. Let's go to the prelims pointers. Coming to the prelims pointers, we have the very first article which talks about the Asiatic lions. Let's go through what the article says. The Asiatic lion, Panthera leopardica, survives exclusively in and around the Gir landscape. Over here in Gujarat, this is the area where the lion survives, making it globally unique. Lion numbers have increased from almost 100 to 150. because at that time, pre-independence, they were hunted and there was a lot of poaching which takes place. But then we started with Project Lion, and therefore the numbers have increased to over 1,000 due to sustained conservation efforts. Beyond the protected areas, nearly 50% of lions now live outside the protected areas, highlighting the shift from protected area conservation to landscape level. And that is also one of the very important keywords as far as the conservation of animals is concerned. We are now having a kind of approach where we have shifted from protected areas conservation mechanisms to that of the landscape mechanisms, because we are also witnessing greater instances of human-wildlife conflict. And in order to avoid that, we need to have a landscape-based approach, where we take into consideration all the aspects, not just that particular protected area. Areas such as Babarkot serve as crucial wildlife corridor, connecting the Gir with the satellite populations like Jafrabad. Corridors are also very important, because if you have good corridors in place, the migration of the animals can take place without any issue. It can take place seamlessly from one particular area to the other. But because of habitat fragmentation, the word is habitat fragmentation, because of the construction of the highways or the other, for example, the rail lines, there is a habitat fragmentation which takes place. Proposals to divert 75 hectares of the reserve forest for limestone mining may fragment the habitats, disrupt connectivity, and increase human-lion conflict. 2018 canine distemper virus outbreak killed over 20 lions, while babesiosis related deaths. Now this is something which is a result of a parasitic infection, the ticks. So it's a parasitic infection, underlines the risk for keeping the entire population in one landscape, because it is communicable, right? Need for the second home, continued delay in establishing a second free-ranging population remains one of the biggest conservation concerns. The IUCN status has basically improved from critically endangered to endangered. Important information can be asked in the prelims. Do remember that the IUCN status of lion has improved from critically endangered to that of the endangered. Project Lion, announced by the Government of India for holistic conservation of Asiatic lions. The focus area is habitat expansion, corridor conservation, so that seamless transfer can take place from one corridor from one area to the other. Disease surveillance. If there is a particular disease outbreak, then there should be prompt response. Human-lion coexistence to prevent the human-wildlife conflict. Genetic conservation. Second home for Asiatic lions, Kuno National Park was identified by the Supreme Court as the alternate habitat. The very objective was reduce the extinction risk from single population concentration, improve the long-term genetic security, the genetic diversity. However, the implementation has been delayed. IUCN status is endangered, population trend increasing. The Asiatic lions remains the only stable northern lion population globally. Wildlife corridors facilitate the gene flow. It maintains that genetic diversity. Seasonal dispersal, reduced inbreeding, climate resilience, protected under the principles of landscape label conservation. For example, we have Kana Bench Corridor, Kaziranga Karbi Anglong, and Babarkot Corridor in Gir itself. Major threats: habitat fragmentation, mining and infrastructure projects, disease outbreaks. For example, I just talked about the canine distemper virus, road and railway mortality, open wells, and human-wildlife conflict. Because of the projects, because of the increase in the population, we have gone for the increase in the agricultural areas, and we have exploited, we have encroached upon the forest regions or the other grasslands, and therefore what has happened is that it has led to more of interactions between the human and the wildlife, and therefore subsequent conflicts. That is what you have to understand with respect to this article. Let's go to the next one. Coming to the next topic is a mention of the urban cooperative banks. The RBI is set to resume the licensing of urban cooperative banks. Let's go through this. Can be asked in the prelims. Urban cooperative banks are not formally defined but refer to primary cooperative banks located in urban and semi-urban areas. The first formal cooperative legislation in India came with the Cooperative Credit Societies Act of 1904 during Lord Curzon's tenure, and also enacted the more comprehensive Cooperative Societies Act of 1912. The first urban cooperative credit society, Anyonya Sahakari Mandali, was established in 1889 in Baroda. Functions to provide the services like housing finance, personal loans, MSME credit, and deposits to small borrowers, traders, and small-scale industries, primarily to promote the financial inclusion. They are registered as cooperative societies under the provisions of either the state cooperative societies or multi-state cooperative societies. The Reserve Bank regulates and supervises the banking functions of UCBs under the provisions of Banking Regulation Act 49. Bank-related functions, licensing, area of operations, interest rates are governed by the RBI. Registration, management, management, audit, and liquidation are governed by the state government as per the provisions of respective state acts. The Reserve Bank has vested the powers to issue licenses to urban cooperative banks under Section 22 and 23 of the Banking Regulation Act, and to carry out the banking business and to open new place of business branches extension respectively. So ultimately, with respect to the banking functions, you have the RBI, which is mandated to look into the licensing and the other things. And you also have some form of regulation done by the state governments with respect to the state cooperative societies. Got it? Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic is a mention of DGMA, that is the Directorate General of Maritime Administration, which is warned of more of cyber threats as more and more number of ports are digitizing, right? So very, very important body. It comes within the jurisdiction of Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways. What it says is the Directorate General of Maritime Administration. Now please understand, UPSC has been asking such type of questions, the body, the jurisdiction and the functions. So this becomes important. Is an attached office. What kind of office? Attached office under the Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways. It deals with all the executive matters relating to the merchant shipping. Remember this. Prior to independence, Indian shipping remained a neglected subject. It was only after the independence that the development of the shipping industry attracted the focused state policy. Initially, the subject of shipping was handled by the Ministry of Commerce. In 51, it was transferred to the Ministry of Transport and Shipping. In 47, the Government of India announced the National Policy on Shipping, aiming at comprehensive development of the industry. To accelerate these developmental efforts, the need for centralized administrative organization was recognized. Accordingly, the Directorate General of Shipping was established. The Directorate deals with with all the matters concerning the maritime administration, maritime education and training, and development of shipping industry and other related subjects. So quite an important body. The Directorate is responsible for implementing the shipping policy and legislation to ensure what it ensures: regulation of employment of seamen and their welfare, development of the sailing vessels industry, regulation of ocean freight rates in overseas trades. The Directorate deals with the implementation of shipping policy and legislation so as to ensure the safety of life and ships at sea, prevention of marine pollution, promotion of maritime education and training, international in coordination with the International Maritime Organization, regulation of employment and welfare of seamen, development of the coastal shipping, augmentation of shipping tonnage, examination and certification of the merchant navy officers. So again, with respect to the maritime shipping, it serves as the primary body, right? The Director General of the Shipping is vested with statutory powers under Section 7 of Merchant Shipping Act of 1958. Very, very important, right? So do remember, can be asked in the prelims. Let's go to the last topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, here's a mention of the place Ceuta. Now, just before a few days, we observed that thousands of people migrated illegally to Spain, right, from Morocco, and that created a lot of panic, and this has questioned the kind of migration policies of Europe. Many of the countries have questioned that, right, and therefore this becomes important, can be asked in the prelims. Just look at this. We have Morocco on the northern side of Africa, and then we have Spain. Over here we have this particular part it is basically a part of Africa, but you have this particular territory, Ceuta, which is a part of Spain's jurisdiction. Spain occupies it, and this is the land border which you have with Morocco, right? So do remember, this is quite an important. Also, if you observe, on the right side, we have Ceuta over here. On the right side, we have Melilla, right? Again, a part of Spain over here. And this is again a part of Spain. Do remember, can be important, can be asked that it comes within the jurisdiction of which country. So it is quite important. We also have the Strait of Gibraltar, which is basically between Spain and we have Africa, Moroccan part, but we also have the Gibraltar. Gibraltar is basically the foreign overseas territory of UK. So that's how the name comes, Strait of Gibraltar. Do remember, it basically separates the Mediterranean Sea with that of the Atlantic Ocean. It connects the Mediterranean Sea with that of the Atlantic Ocean. Quite important places, can be asked in the examination. Do remember, these are the two parts in Morocco which are basically under the occupation of Spain, under legal occupation of Spain. Got it? So that's it from my side. I hope you really enjoyed the discussion. Keep studying and take care of yourself. Thank you.